The silence was wrong. Master Chief Petty Officer Kazak Thornfield had been running Hell Week for 17 years, and silence during the final phase meant only two things. Someone was dead, or someone had just done something impossible. Through his binoculars, he watched the lone figure moving across the kill house at 3:47 hours, 3 days into the most brutal selection process the Navy had ever designed. The recruit moved like smoke through shadows, and Thornfield's weathered hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the focus. What he was witnessing defied every metric, every baseline, every goddamn rule they'd written about human limitation. The shot came at 2,614 meters. Impossible range, impossible conditions. The target was a playing card, ace of spades, pinned to a wooden post, barely visible even through advanced optics. Wind speed, 15 knots gusting to 22. Humidity, 87%. Barometric pressure dropping. The kind of conditions that would make a sniper's bullet dance like a drunk sailor. Thornfield heard the sharp crack of the rifle, followed by absolute silence. Then Petty Officer Valdez's voice crackled through the radio, barely controlled. "Chief, you need to see this." The recruit stood motionless behind the Barrett M82, stance perfect, breathing controlled. But this wasn't just any recruit. This was Seaman Recruit Indira Ghost Khatri, 5'4", 130 pounds soaking wet, the same woman half the instructors had already written off as a diversity checkbox. The same woman who'd been taking quiet abuse for 8 weeks, enduring whispered doubts about whether women belonged in their sacred brotherhood. Thornfield lowered his binoculars and felt something shift in his chest, something that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "Valdez, confirm target status." Thornfield's voice came out rougher than intended. "Clean hit, Chief. Dead center, playing card is." It split perfectly in half. The implications hit Thornfield like a physical blow. 2,614 meters. The longest confirmed sniper kill in military history was 3,540 meters, achieved by a Canadian Special Forces sniper with a team of spotters, perfect conditions, and months of preparation. This kid, this woman they'd been systematically underestimating, had just posted the 4th longest shot in recorded history using standard-issue equipment, alone, in garbage conditions, during the most exhausting week of her life. Thornfield keyed his radio with hands that weren't quite steady. All stations, exercise complete, stand down." He paused, watching Khatri finally lower the rifle, her silhouette dark against the pre-dawn sky. Something about her posture, tired but unbroken, accomplished but not cocky, reminded him why he joined the Navy in the first place. "Someone get me the range data. I want everything verified, double-checked, and documented." The rulebook was about to be rewritten, and Master Chief Thornfield was going to make sure history remembered exactly who had done the rewriting. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Blackwood received the call at 6:23 hours while reviewing training reports in his cramped office at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The voice on the other end belonged to Chief Thornfield, and in 17 years of knowing the man, Blackwood had never heard him sound quite like this, equal parts stunned and vindicated. "Sir, we need to talk. Now, it's about Seaman Recruit Khatri." Blackwood rubbed his eyes, already knowing this conversation would complicate his day. Indira Khatri had been a lightning rod since day one of Bud's training. The daughter of immigrants, she'd grown up in rural Montana, hunting elk and mule deer with her father's ancient Winchester. Her shooting scores during initial assessment had been impressive but not extraordinary. What made her controversial wasn't her marksmanship, it was everything else. She was quiet where others were loud, methodical where others were aggressive, and worst of all in the eyes of many instructors, she was a woman attempting to breach the last masculine sanctuary in the military. What did she do now, Chief? She just put a round through a playing card at 2,614 meters, in shifting winds, with iron sights. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Blackwood had been a sniper instructor before taking over Bud's administration. He understood the mathematics of long-range shooting, the convergence of skill, equipment, and sheer luck required for such a shot. What Thornfield was describing wasn't just impressive, it bordered on supernatural. "You're certain of the range?" "Triple checked, sir. GPS confirmed. Weather station data logged. Target impact verified by 3 separate observers. The shot is legitimate." Blackwood felt the familiar weight of decision settling on his shoulders. News of this magnitude wouldn't stay contained. Within hours, word would spread through the special operations community like wildfire. Reporters would come calling. Politicians would make speeches. And at the center of it all would be a 22-year-old woman who just wanted to serve her country. "How's she handling it?" Thornfield's laugh carried no humor. "That's the thing, sir. She acted like it was routine. No celebration, no surprise. She made the shot, confirmed the hit, and asked for her next assignment. The other recruits are looking at her like she's some kind of ghost." The nickname had started as mockery. Ghost Khatri, so quiet she seemed to disappear, so small she barely registered on the peripheral vision of her louder, more aggressive classmates. But mockery had a way of transforming into something else when backed by impossible competence. Blackwood had seen it before, the moment when a derisive nickname becomes a mark of respect, even fear. "Keep this quiet for now, Chief. I need time to think." But even as he said the words, Blackwood knew quiet was no longer an option. The ripple effects were already spreading, invisible but inevitable. In barracks across the base, word was spreading in hushed tones. In the mess hall, conversation stopped when Khatri walked past. The woman who had been invisible was suddenly the most visible person on the base. And she had no idea her life had just changed forever. The mess hall buzzed with the kind of low, intense conversation that preceded legend. Seaman recruit Tommy Morrison picked at his scrambled eggs, stealing glances at the small figure sitting alone 3 tables away. Indira Khatri ate methodically, her dark eyes fixed on some middle distance that seemed to exist beyond the walls of the facility. She looked exactly the same as she had yesterday, compact, unremarkable, quietly competent. But everything had changed. 2,600 fucking meters, whispered recruit Jason Park, his voice barely audible above the clatter of breakfast trays. "My uncle was force recon, and he said the best sniper in his battalion couldn't make that shot on his best day." Morrison nodded absently, remembering the cruel jokes they'd shared just weeks ago. Ghost Khatri, they'd called her, the way she seemed to fade into the background during group exercises. The way she spoke only when spoken to, completed tasks without fanfare, and endured the casual sexism of military culture with stoic silence. They'd mistaken her quietness for weakness, her methodical approach for slowness. How wrong they'd been. Across the mess hall, Staff Sergeant Rivera watched the dynamic shift with professional interest. 23 years in the Marines had taught her to recognize pivotal moments in group psychology. Yesterday, Khatri had been an outsider, tolerated but not truly accepted. Today, she was something else entirely. An enigma, a standard-bearer, a living reminder that assumptions could be deadly. "You think she knows?" asked Corpsman Bradley, settling his tray next to Rivera's. "Knows what?" "That she just changed everything, for all of us." Rivera studied Khatri's profile, noting the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw worked almost imperceptibly as she chewed. Oh, she knew. The question was how she would handle the knowledge. The truth was that Indira Khatri had been carrying secrets her entire life. Secrets about growing up brown in a town where diversity meant Norwegians and Swedes. Secrets about learning to shoot because it was the only activity where her father's immigrant status didn't matter, where skill trumped social standing. Secrets about joining the Navy not for glory or career advancement, but because military service was the fastest path to citizenship for parents who had sacrificed everything for their daughter's future. She'd never intended to become a symbol. She'd certainly never intended to break records. But intention, as Master Chief Thornfield had learned long ago, was irrelevant when faced with capability. Khatri finished her breakfast and stood, her movements economical and precise. The conversations around her didn't quite stop, but they shifted, became more conscious. She was no longer background noise in their story, she was the story. As she walked toward the exit, Morrison caught a glimpse of her eyes. They held something he hadn't noticed before, or perhaps hadn't wanted to see. A depth that spoke of burdens carried, expectations exceeded, and barriers broken not through aggression or politics, but through quiet, relentless competence. The nickname would stick, but its meaning had fundamentally changed. She was still Ghost, but now it was because she could appear anywhere, strike from impossible ranges, and vanish back into legend. The morning briefing felt different. Commander Sarah Elizabeth Vega had conducted thousands of these sessions over her 15-year career, but today the air in the conference room crackled with barely contained energy. Word traveled fast in the special operations community, especially word about impossible shots made by impossible candidates. "Gentlemen," she began, then corrected herself with deliberate precision, "and lady, I assume you've all heard about yesterday's range exercise." The assembled instructors shifted in their seats. Master Chief Thornfield sat straight-backed, his weathered face carefully neutral. Lieutenant Phillips, the marksmanship coordinator, looked like a man who'd had his fundamental understanding of ballistics challenged. And in the back, almost invisible despite wearing the same uniform as everyone else, sat Seaman Recruit Indira Khatri. Vega had made the decision to include Khatri in this briefing against protocol. Standard procedure would have kept the recruit isolated while her performance was reviewed and verified. But standard procedure hadn't anticipated someone rewriting the record books during basic training. "The shot has been verified by 3 independent sources," Vega continued. "Range, 2,614 meters. Conditions, 15 to 22 knot crosswinds, 87% humidity, falling barometric pressure. Target, standard playing card, dimensions 57 by 89 millimeters. Result, clean hit, dead center." She paused, letting the numbers sink in. In the silence, she could hear the distant sound of helicopters conducting training runs, the rhythm of boots on pavement, the ordinary sounds of a military base going about its business. But in this room, ordinary had been suspended. "Recruit Khatri," Vega's voice cut through the quiet. "Stand up." Khatri rose smoothly, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes focused on a point slightly above Vega's head. Standard military bearing, but Vega noticed the subtle signs of tension, the slight whitening of knuckles, the controlled breathing, the way she held herself just a fraction too rigidly. "Tell me about the shot." For a moment, Khatri said nothing. When she spoke, her voice was steady but quiet, carrying the slight accent that marked her as first-generation American. "Ma'am, I observed the target at 3:47 hours. Wind conditions were variable but predictable within acceptable parameters. I calculated bullet drop, windage, and atmospheric pressure effects using standard formulas. The shot felt correct when I took it." "Felt correct?" Lieutenant Phillips leaned forward. "Recruit, do you understand what you accomplished? That's the 4th longest confirmed shot in military history." Khatri's expression didn't change. "Yes, sir. My father taught me that good shooting comes from preparation, patience, and respect for the weapon. The distance was challenging but within the rifle's capabilities." The simplicity of her answer was staggering. No bravado, no false modesty, just matter-of-fact competence. Vega found herself reassessing every assumption she'd made about the young woman standing before her. "Your father," Vega said slowly, "tell me about him." For the first time, something shifted in Khatri's carefully controlled expression. "He emigrated from Nepal in 1995, ma'am. Worked construction during the week, hunted weekends to feed the family. He taught me that shooting isn't about killing, it's about precision, discipline, and providing." The room fell silent as the implications settled. They'd been so focused on the shot itself that they'd missed the story behind it. This wasn't just talent. This was generations of mountain hunting tradition, refined through necessity and passed down through careful teaching. Commander Vega made her decision. The call came at 13:47 hours, interrupting Admiral Jonathan Pierce's lunch meeting with congressional defense liaisons. His aide's voice carried the particular tension that meant either catastrophe or miracle. "Sir, we have a situation requiring your immediate attention. It concerns the Bud-S program." Pierce excused himself from the meeting, already calculating damage control scenarios. In his experience, situations requiring immediate attention usually meant scandals, injuries, or political complications. The Bud-S program, basic underwater demolition SEAL training, had been under increasing scrutiny from Capitol Hill regarding diversity and inclusion. The last thing he needed was another controversy. "Talk to me, Davidson." "Sir, it's about Seaman Recruit Khatri. She's made a shot." Pierce rubbed his temples. "What kind of shot?" 2,614 meters, sir. Confirmed hit. Playing card target." The silence stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Pierce had been a SEAL himself before climbing the administrative ladder. He understood the significance immediately. In the rarefied world of military marksmanship, certain numbers carried weight that transcended mere statistics. 2,614 meters wasn't just impressive, it was legend-making. "Jesus Christ, are we certain?" "Triple verified, sir. GPS coordinates, weather data, target impact photography, multiple witness statements. Commander Vega is requesting permission to recommend Recruit Khatri for immediate advanced training." Pierce found himself facing a decision that would ripple far beyond one recruit's career. The military was a tradition-bound institution, resistant to change and suspicious of anyone who disrupted established patterns. But it was also, at its core, a meritocracy. Performance mattered, results mattered, and results like this were impossible to ignore. "What's the political climate?" Davidson's hesitation spoke volumes. "Mixed, sir. Progressive groups are already calling it a breakthrough moment for women in combat roles. Conservative factions are questioning the validity of the testing. Media requests are piling up." Of course they were. Pierce had watched enough careers destroyed by the intersection of military excellence and political controversy. But he'd also seen what happened when institutions failed to recognize genuine capability. The military couldn't afford to waste talent, especially talent of this caliber. "Schedule a classified briefing with the Joint Chiefs. I want every detail of this recruit's performance analyzed. Background check, psychological evaluation, the works." And Davidson: "Yes, sir. Keep this quiet until we understand exactly what we're dealing with." But even as Pierce gave the order, he knew quiet was no longer an option. Word was already spreading through unofficial channels, carried by the invisible network of military personnel who understood the significance of what they'd witnessed. In bases across the world, snipers and marksmen were hearing whispered accounts of the impossible shot made by the woman they called Ghost. The legend had begun, and legends, Pierce knew, had a way of taking on lives of their own. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez had been the senior marksmanship instructor at Coronado for 6 years, and in that time, she'd seen every variety of shooter the military produced. Natural talents who could hit anything but couldn't handle pressure. Mechanical shooters who followed every rule but lacked the intuitive understanding that separated good from great. And once in a very long while, she encountered something that defied classification entirely. Seaman Recruit Khatri fell into that final category. "Show me your grip," Vasquez commanded, watching as Khatri settled behind the rifle on the 1,000-yard range. The morning sun cast long shadows across the firing line, and a steady breeze carried the scent of gun oil and California sage. Khatri's hands moved with practiced economy, finding their positions on the stock and grip with the kind of muscle memory that spoke of thousands of repetitions. But there was something else in her movements, a patience that bordered on meditation, a stillness that seemed to extend beyond her physical form. Breathing. In on the natural respiratory pause, sir. My father called it finding the space between heartbeats. Vasquez nodded slowly. She'd heard similar philosophy from Olympic-level competitors and Special Forces snipers, but never from a recruit who'd grown up hunting deer in Montana. The woman, she corrected herself, had learned principles that some career marksmen never mastered. Wind conditions. Khatri's eyes never left the scope, but her voice carried absolute certainty. 7 knots from 270 degrees, gusting to 12. Mirage pattern indicates thermal activity will increase over the next 20 minutes. Current shot calls for 2.3 minutes of angle left windage. The calculations were precise, professional, and delivered without hesitation. Vasquez had watched Marines with years of sniper training struggle with similar assessments. This recruit processed environmental factors like a computer, but with the intuitive understanding that only came from experience. Take the shot when ready. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the range. Downrange, the spotting scope revealed a hit dead center in the X-ring. Perfect score, as if there had never been any doubt. Again, Vasquez ordered. Again the same result, and again, and again. By the time they'd burned through 200 rounds of match-grade ammunition, Vasquez had witnessed something that would haunt her professional dreams for months afterward. Not a single shot had strayed outside the 9-ring. Most hit dead center. The group size at 1,000 yards measured less than 6 inches, performance that bordered on mechanical precision. Recruit, where did you learn to shoot like this? For the first time that morning, Khatri's composure showed the slightest crack. Her voice carried something that might have been homesickness or grief or both. My father, Sergeant, every weekend from age 8 until I left for boot camp. He said Americans respect marksmanship because it cannot be faked or inherited. Either you can make the shot or you cannot. Vasquez found herself thinking about her own father, a career Marine who taught her the fundamentals on a backyard range in North Carolina. But this was different. This was a refugee's child learning American values through crosshairs and windage adjustments, building citizenship one perfect shot at a time. He sounds like a wise man. He died 3 months before I shipped out, Sergeant. Heart attack. He never got to see me graduate boot camp. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that went far beyond marksmanship scores. Suddenly, the impossible shot at 2,614 meters took on different meaning. This wasn't just about breaking records. It was about honoring a promise, completing a journey that had begun in the mountains of Montana with a father who understood that in America, competence was the only currency that mattered. Vasquez made a decision that would change both their careers. Pack your gear, recruit. You're coming with me to meet some people. The secure conference room at Naval Special Warfare Command felt different from anything Khatri had experienced in her brief military career. The walls were lined with photographs of SEAL teams in exotic locations, their faces blackened with camouflage paint, their eyes carrying the weight of classified missions. At the head of the table sat a man whose name she wasn't told, but whose bearing screamed senior leadership. Recruit Khatri. The man's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need complete honesty in your responses. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Why did you join the Navy? The question seemed simple, but Khatri had learned to recognize when simple questions carried complex implications. Her answer would determine not just her immediate future, but potentially the trajectory of her entire military career. To serve my country, sir, and to honor my father's sacrifice. Elaborate. Khatri took a breath, choosing her words carefully. My parents came to America with nothing except the belief that their daughter could become something impossible in their homeland. My father worked construction for 20 years, sent every spare dollar to relatives still in Nepal, and never complained. He taught me that citizenship isn't just about papers, it's about being worthy of the trust this country places in you. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Around the table, other officers leaned forward slightly, suddenly paying attention in a way that went beyond professional courtesy. And the shooting, where did that come from? Necessity, sir. My father believed that Americans respect competence above all else. If I was going to succeed in this country, I needed to be better than good. I needed to be undeniable. The word hung in the air like a sniper's bullet finding its target. Undeniable. It was perhaps the most accurate description anyone had given of her performance to date. The shot you made yesterday has attracted significant attention. Recruit. Attention from people who don't typically concern themselves with Bud-S training. Do you understand what that means? Khatri's training had prepared her for many things, but not for this conversation with unnamed officials in rooms that didn't officially exist. Still, her father's lessons applied. When faced with uncertainty, default to truth. I believe it means my performance has exceeded expected parameters, sir. I assume there will be consequences, both positive and negative. A slight smile crossed the man's face, the first emotion he'd shown since the conversation began. That's perhaps the most mature response I've heard to that question. Most recruits would have given me some variation of "I just want to serve," or "I didn't know it was a big deal." You understand that exceptional performance carries exceptional responsibilities. Yes, sir. Good, because I'm about to offer you something that's never been offered to a recruit at your stage of training. Advanced Marksman School, immediate transfer to specialized training programs, and a fast track to units that most operators spend years trying to join. The offer should have been thrilling. It was everything a career-focused service member could want, but something in the man's tone suggested complications. What's the catch, sir? The smile widened. The catch, recruit Khatri, is that accepting means becoming a symbol whether you want to or not. It means having your every move scrutinized, your every mistake magnified, and your every success used to make political points you may not agree with. It means carrying the hopes and fears of people you've never met. Khatri thought of her father, working dawn to dusk laying concrete foundations for other people's dreams. He'd never sought the spotlight, never demanded recognition. He'd simply done the work, trusting that competence would eventually be rewarded. Sir, I didn't join the military to become a symbol. I joined to serve. If serving means accepting additional scrutiny, I can handle that. Even if it means being used as a political football. Sir, my father used to say that you can't control how people use your success, but you can control whether that success is real. I intend to keep being real. The man exchanged glances with the other officers around the table, and Khatri sensed that some unspoken communication had passed between them. Welcome to the big leagues, Petty Officer Khatri. The promotion was effective immediately. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, carried first by military blogs and social media accounts before being picked up by mainstream outlets. By noon, Navy sniper makes impossible shot was trending across multiple platforms. By evening, Indira Khatri's photograph, pulled from official Navy records, was being broadcast on national television. In her quarters at Coronado, Khatri watched the coverage with growing unease. The reporters got most of the facts right, but they missed the nuance entirely. They talked about breaking barriers and shattering glass ceilings, about women in combat and changing military culture. What they didn't talk about was the years of practice, the patient instruction, the quiet dedication that made extraordinary performance possible. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw you on the news. Dad would be proud. Uncle Raj. The simple message hit harder than any of the media coverage. Uncle Raj had been her father's closest friend, a fellow immigrant who'd helped navigate the bureaucracy of American life. If word had reached him in Montana, it had reached everyone. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Staff Sergeant Vasquez entered without waiting for permission, her expression unreadable. "How are you handling the attention, Khatri?" "It's different than I expected, Sergeant. I thought if the shot was good enough, that would be the end of it. Make the shot, move on to the next assignment." Vasquez sat on the edge of the narrow desk. Her body language suggesting this was more personal conversation than professional briefing. "Can I tell you something about exceptional performance in the military?" Khatri nodded. "The shot is never the end of anything. It's the beginning. What you did yesterday didn't just break a record, it changed expectations. Not just for you, but for every woman who comes after you. Every female recruit who walks into Bud-S training from now on will be measured against what you accomplished." The weight of that responsibility settled on Khatri's shoulders like a rucksack full of stones. She'd never wanted to be a pioneer, never sought to change anything beyond her own circumstances. But intention, as she was learning, mattered less than capability. "The question," Vasquez continued, "is what you do with that knowledge. Some people would let it paralyze them. Others would let it go to their head. The smart ones find a way to use it." "Use it how?" "By remembering that every time you perform, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing every person who looks like you, who comes from where you come from, who carries the same dreams your father carried. That's not fair, and it's not something you asked for, but it's real." Khatri stared at her hands, thinking about the phone calls that had been flooding the base switchboard, the interview requests being fielded by public affairs officers, the political machinery that was already attempting to co-opt her story. "What if I just want to be a good sailor?" "Then be the best sailor anyone's ever seen. Be so good that nobody can question whether you belong here. Be so consistent that your success becomes normal instead of extraordinary." Vasquez stood to leave, then paused at the door. "And Khatri, your father didn't raise you to hide. He raised you to excel. Don't disappoint him by trying to make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable." The words echoed long after the sergeant had left, mixing with the distant sound of helicopters and the eternal rhythm of military life continuing around her. The advanced marksmanship course was held at a facility that didn't officially exist, taught by instructors whose names were classified, and attended by students who would never appear on any public roster. Khatri found herself in the company of special operations personnel from every branch of the military: Rangers, Force Recon Marines, Air Force Pararescue, and SEALs whose quiet competence radiated danger. She was also, noticeably, the only woman. The head instructor introduced himself simply as Smith, obviously not his real name, and began the course with a statement that would define the next 6 weeks of training. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because you have demonstrated exceptional marksmanship capability under standard conditions. This course will teach you to maintain that capability under conditions that are anything but standard. You will shoot in darkness, in weather, from unstable platforms, while exhausted, while under fire, and while experiencing the kind of stress that makes grown operators wet themselves." His eyes found Khatri in the group, and she felt the weight of evaluation from someone who had clearly been briefed on her circumstances. "Some of you are here because of politics, some because of public relations, some because your commands needed to fill a slot. I don't care about any of that. I care about whether you can make the shot when lives depend on it. Politics don't kill enemy combatants. Public relations don't bring hostages home alive. Making the shot does." The first exercise began immediately. A 1,000-yard shot from a helicopter flying at 120 knots, 40 feet above the ocean, in 15-knot crosswinds. Half the class missed the target entirely. Khatri's shot hit center mass. By the end of the first week, a pattern had emerged. While other students struggled to adapt their marksmanship to unconventional circumstances, Khatri seemed to thrive on the challenges. Her shooting background in Montana mountains had included every environmental variable the instructors could devise: high altitude, extreme weather, moving targets, and the kind of field conditions that separated hunters from tourists. "Where did you learn to shoot from helicopters?" asked Master Sergeant Collins, a Force Recon Marine whose quiet competence reminded Khatri of her father. "Never have, Sergeant, but my father taught me to shoot from tree stands, off cliffs, from the back of moving ATVs during hunting season. The platform changes, but the fundamentals remain the same." Collins nodded thoughtfully. He'd been skeptical when word came down about including a female Bud-S recruit in advanced training. Political correctness, he'd assumed, diluting standards to satisfy Washington bureaucrats. But watching Khatri work was like watching a master craftsman, every movement economical, every decision calculated, every shot delivered with quiet confidence that bordered on boredom. "What's your goal here, petty officer?" The question caught Khatri slightly off guard. In 6 weeks of intensive training, nobody had asked about her goals, only her performance. "To be good enough that nobody questions whether I belong here, Sergeant." And if that's not possible, if there are always going to be people who question your presence regardless of performance. Khatri considered the question while cleaning her rifle, a meditative process her father had insisted upon after every shooting session. The familiar motions of disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly provided comfort in an environment that offered very little. "Then I'll be so good that their questions become irrelevant." Collins smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth she'd received from any of the instructors. "That, Petty Officer Khatri, is the correct answer." The final exercise of the course was designed to break students. A 2-mile infiltration through simulated enemy territory, followed by a precision shot at 1,800 meters while under simulated fire, exhausted, and operating on 3 hours of sleep over the past 2 days. Failure rate typically ran above 60%. Khatri made the shot on her first attempt. When the course ended, she graduated third in a class of 24, behind only a Delta Force operator and a SEAL Team 6 sniper, both with years of combat experience. Her final evaluation read simply, "Exceptional performer. Recommend for immediate deployment consideration." But the real validation came from Master Sergeant Collins as the class prepared to disperse. "Khatri, I owe you an apology." "Sergeant, I thought you were here because of politics. I was wrong. You're here because you're one of the best I've ever seen. Your father would be proud." The words meant more than any official commendation, more than any media attention or political endorsement. They were professional recognition from someone who understood what it meant to excel under pressure. As she packed her gear for the next phase of training, Khatri reflected on how much had changed since that morning on the range at Coronado. She was no longer the quiet recruit trying to prove herself worthy. She was becoming something else entirely, a professional warfighter whose reputation would precede her wherever the Navy chose to send her next. The orders came sealed in an envelope marked with classification stamps that indicated her next assignment was several levels above her current security clearance. Commander Vega handed her the packet personally, along with travel orders that would take her across the country to a facility she'd never heard of. "Congratulations, Petty Officer Second Class Khatri," Vega said, emphasizing the new rank that had been effective immediately upon graduation from the advanced course. "You've been selected for something that doesn't have an official name, but is widely considered the highest honor the Navy can bestow on a marksman." Khatri broke the seal carefully, aware that the moment represented another threshold in a military career that seemed to be accelerating beyond her ability to process. The orders were brief, professionally written, and utterly opaque about the nature of her new assignment. Report to Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane Division. Additional instructions to be provided upon arrival. Clearance level, top secret special compartmented information. Ma'am, can you tell me anything about what I'll be doing there? Vega's smile carried the particular mix of pride and concern that Khatri had learned to recognize in superior officers who had become genuine mentors. What I can tell you is that you'll be working with people who do things that never make the news, in places that don't appear on maps, for reasons that are classified so far above both our pay grades that we'd need oxygen masks to read the briefings. The implications were both thrilling and terrifying. Special operations work, the kind of assignments that defined military careers and created legends whispered in briefing rooms around the world, but also the kind of work that carried risks proportional to its importance. The unofficial word, Vega continued, is that someone very senior noticed your performance and decided the Navy's investment in your training should be put to practical use sooner rather than later. Khatri thought about the progression of her military career, from struggling recruit to record-breaking marksman to advanced training graduate in less than a year. The acceleration felt unnatural, as if forces beyond her control were pushing her toward destinations she hadn't chosen. Ma'am, am I ready for this? The question carried weight beyond simple professional anxiety. Khatri had always been methodical, preferring to master fundamentals before advancing to complex applications. This assignment felt like being asked to run before she'd fully learned to walk. That's the wrong question, petty officer. The right question is whether the Navy can afford not to use your capabilities while we have them. The phrasing struck her as oddly ominous, as if her career carried an expiration date that hadn't been shared with her.